Boxes are proliferating. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Before we start, we're gonna be. It would be it'd be nice if we all like knew our new names. I mean, people put up their names here, so it's easier to identify people who are not necessarily in the room. So maybe we could just move around and people can introduce themselves quickly. I know that people online, that's your prerogative if you want to introduce yourself via naming yourself, but I'm assuming that the name that I can read is the name that you'd like me to call you, and others might call you too. We're just gonna like move around so everybody know each other. So maybe we just go around and say names quickly.
Alan, Neva,
James,
Tomas,
Paul,
David,
Diane,
Harley,
Roberta, Elizabeth,
Bill,
Karen,
Eden.
Rachel,
and our owl.
Archimedes. That's the owl from Sword and Stone.
Yeah, Archimedes. We're talking about owl Archimedes. Nice to meet you, Archimedes. So we are decidedly and everyone else online. We're so happy to have you with us. We're looking. We don't know where to look sometimes, so you can forgive us if you're trying to track us in our eyes. We're like looking at the owl. We're looking at each other, but we're doing the best we can to make the online and onsite community feel as close as possible, even though it's not precise and it's not really fully possible. But we're excited to be with you this morning. It's also apropos of this week's tour portion and the focus that we'll have on it in terms of hospitality and hosting and guests and who's the guest and who's the host and so on, all those things. And those who were with us last night in the shul, I spoke about this topic, and so we're going a little bit deeper into it. And there was also an email from somebody that again will be unforgettable, hopefully in the annals of Romemu, around someone who came to Romemu, had been here 8 or 9 times, and even had come to Neila, and nobody had yet introduced themselves to him. And it was really it hit me and Jeff and I think all of us here who pride Romemu on being a very welcoming, loving, and open place. It really struck us as like, whoa, how is that even possible? And it clearly is. And so no brow beating and no chest thumping. It's just kind of like just bringing awareness and Torah to this topic would be a good thing. Torah, bringing Torah to these places is a good thing. So we'll start with Berchot HaTorah. I don't know if Ari has it, but if you don't, it's okay. We'll all at this point. We'll do one word at a time. So let's just do it. So Baruch Atah Eloheinu melech Hashem Really beautiful. All right, let's see if this sharing and finding and all this after all of that works. Let's no, not the first thing to do. First thing is to open the text, and that means finding it. In my opera area. 1 second. Can I put it in here? Shall we get it in here? There it is. Good guess. All right. So as you'll see in source number 1, we begin this morning's with Parshat Vayera in the beginning. Oh, by the way, it's also good if you feel like, Ari, if you want to do this, chatting the names of people you'd like to lift up through this morning's learning. It's also, something that that's available. Gesundheit. And making it larger is also something. Let's see if we're dealing in. I'm exhausted just from all the just to get it ready. There you go. Let's also make it 1 page. All right. Vayira elav Adonai be'elonei Mamre. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh appears to him. Right? There's no name. No one is named here. There's no nominal. Just to him. Who's him? Is clearly well, not clearly, but Avram is the subject in the preceding chapter 17. Avram has been told to circumcise himself, to circumcise his house, circumcise his 13-year-old son Ishmael, and Avram right? Abraham dutifully and obediently does this, right? And so that's the context, that's the context for these verses. So
Well, he's named later on in the passage, so you know it has to be him. I
Not-
presume.
presumably, again, but like right,
Okay.
whenever, right, that's true, but it should say Vayera Adonai
Yeah, it
El
should.
Avram, right?
Yeah,
The fact that it, right, the reversal here is also linguistically troubling to many of those who follow the Torah, who know the Torah. Like usually that which is revealed is before the one to whom it's revealed. So it's usually Vayera Adonai, and God appeared El Avraham. And here it's Vayera to him Adonai, right? Vayera Elav Adonai is also kind of syntactically backwards, and it leaves a lot of ink and a lot of interesting. Why is it reversed in this particular place? But this also, the fact that it's not the fact that Avram is not named is interesting, but it's also interesting because that there's no speech act here, right? So Vayirai Lav Adonai in the trees of or in the terebinths or the trees of Mamre, Elone Mamre, who's Mamre? Mamre has been mentioned earlier in the story of the kings, the 4 kings and the 5 kings. There are 3 characters, Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. These 3 characters who seem to be part of Avram's posse, right? And so Avram is in his friend Mamre's. He's like set up a tent there. Why is he called Mamre according to the rabbis? A lot of different opinions. One beautiful midrash says that Mamre was the one, and Rashi quotes it here. Mamre is the one out of the 3 of those characters who told Abraham to go forward with the circumcision. Apparently, unbeknownst to us, Abraham's dutiful and obedience was actually midrashically becomes hesitancy, and which we can readily forgive. So apparently, according to Midrash, Abraham hears from God, what? And he goes immediately to Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre, his friends whom he had appeared with in the war, and he says to them, God said, do this, and Aner says to him, you're a little bit old for that, right? And he says, okay, let me go to Eshkol. Eshkol says, well, no one else will be circumcised in the area that you live. You really is that really diplomatic of you to do something that is so countercultural and not a smart idea? And then Mamre, apparently, and his name midrashically is that he was Mamre. He was willing to stand up in the face of his 2 friends and tell Avram, listen, God took you from here and there, and let's get, it's a big deal, but probably a good idea. God's on your side. And so now he merits to have this revelation happen in his orchards or in his forest, whatever it might be. And then the Torah says, "V'hu yoshev petach ha'oel kechom hayom," and who, also really curious, who's the who? Who's on first? V'hu yoshev petach ha'oel. He's sitting at the opening to the tent kechom hayom in the heat of the day. And he lifts his eyes up and he sees. Now you'll also notice, of course, that this Vayar that he sees is also connected to the Vayera, right? Just linguistically.
Yeah.
This is the second of the same letters. Their vowels are slightly different, but the visitation and the seeing of God of Avram leads to Avram seeing something else. He lifts up his eyes and he sees. This phrase, lifting up the eyes and seeing, is also very prominent biblically as Sa'inai el-Harim, right, in the story of Hagar. And she lifts up her eyes are opened. There's a lot of lifting up of the eyes, and he sees, Dinei, and behold, so Shan Hashim Nitzavim Alav, and there are 3 men, Nitzavim Alav, literally means they're standing on him. They're they have come upon him, and maybe probably a sense of surprise, I didn't realize it, right? Here they are. Nitzavim Alav. Sorry, go ahead. Good morning. Oh my goodness, good to see you. Wow. Good to see you. Welcome. So Nitzavim Alav, they're on him. Vayar, and he sees, which is also an odd Vayar, just to take note. It's the 3rd time in the text that the same 4 letters appear. And this second seeing is also doesn't have an object, which is kind of weird, right? He saw, and behold, he saw these 3 men, and then he sees again. What is the second seeing, right? But we'll get to that in the Morinaim, or we'll get to that in your comments. Vayaratz likratam. All of a sudden now, this energy of Abraham as he runs to greet them. Mipetach ha'oel, from the opening of the tent, Vayishtachu arza, and he bows to the ground. Vayomar, and he says, Adoshem, this is the way it's really Adonai. It's funny that this is Adoshem, because really it's not a divine name in the simple meaning of the text. It's Adonai, meaning Lord, right? You know, my Lord, Lord. I mean, like Lord, Adonai. If I have found chayim in your eyes. The second time the word eyes appears also, right? Lifting his eyes, he sees here now. If in your eyes I have found favor, al na, please do not ta'avor me'al avdecha. Please do not ta'avor. Don't pass me by. Do not pass by your servant. He calls himself servant, right?
It's all in singular.
And there it's right, and he's there in the singular, and he speaks to them in the singular.
Yeah.
Right, so that leads Rashi to say that, simply he's talking to the great, that there was clearly one of the three was the leader. And so he spoke to the leader of the, who was at the head, and there were two behind him. So that's how Rashi reconciles the grammatical anomaly of speaking to three people in the singular. Says to them in the singular. And so Rashi says, Lagadol Mubatchil, he spoke to the first one. But clearly he is now throwing himself at the feet, quite literally, of these people. And he says to me, take a little bit of water, which is kind of sweet, right? Why does he have to say ma'at mayim? Like, just take a little bit of water, and then, wash your feet, which is presumably just because they're walking in the desert and their feet are dirty. But of course, it leads the rabbis to say that he's cleaning off their feet because they're of the avodah zarah, like something having to do with idolatry in the feet, and because they prostrate themselves and so on. But whatever. Like on the symbol level, he's just wanting them to take a shower, like take care of yourself. You're little, you're all schleppy and running. And now rest tachat ha'etz. You can recline and take your load off. And under this tree. Why does it say ha'etz instead of tachat eitz? Under the tree, that leads to a lot of interesting Torah. Is it the tree of life? Is it the tree of knowledge? Dohar says that the eitz here, the tree, is a tree that could discern if the people were idol worshippers or if they were monotheists, or it was a magic tree, very mythical here. It's almost mythical. If we take it out of that realm of mythical, he could see what their intentions were. Like somehow it was almost like the tree was an oracular tree, and they would sit under the tree and say, oh, they have good intentions. And if not, it's a way of doing a background check on them, as it were. Like, who are they? They're underneath the tree. Vaycha pat lechem, take a little bit of bread, sa'adu libichem, and feed your hearts, right? Give a feast to your heart, achar tavar, and then you can go. Yalkein avartel avdechem. It's a very, very powerful and strange phrase. For this reason, you have passed by your servant. Almost, it's an odd thing to say to a guest. The only reason why you come to town is, or the reason why we've come together is so that I can serve you. But it's also a beautiful thing to say. Isn't this the reason why we've had this meeting, is so that I can be of service to you, right? This is the reason why you've come past by your servant. And they said, "Came to asek asher dibarta." Also, powerful, strange. Sure, we'll do as you said. Not exactly enthusiastic, like thank you so much, but yeah, great. So that gives Abraham here the alacrity. Vayimaher Abraham. Abraham now is in a hurry. Vayimaher Abraham. He runs to the tent to Sarah. Vayomer Mahari. Again this phrase Mahari. Hurry up. Shalosh se'im kemach solet. Like they get into this whole business, right? Make food, everybody. We have guests. Everybody, get ready. Place this. Like it's gonna happen. And this alacrity becomes a very powerful part of the story on a simple level, right? So he's already run to greet them. He runs into the tent, and then the Elabakar Ratz Abraham. Now he runs out to the cattle. The word Ratz again appears. Vaikach ben bakar rach vatov yiten lanar. He takes a young and choice part of the cattle. He doesn't go for the worst. He goes to the best, which is like, wow, he's taking out the royal, cutlery. And it's not like it's such an energy of Abraham. You're so happy that these three people are here. He gets a chance to serve them. And he runs again. And Vayimaher, again, it's like the word maher appears 3 times. It's almost like the verses are in a hurry. Like the very verses are in a hurry to squeeze in as many words of hurry in themselves, right? Like I takes butter, halav. Don't get into the dairy laws here. It's dietarily very, is he kosher? Is he not kosher? Clearly doesn't have 2 sets of dishes, let alone 3 or 4 from Pesach. And then he gets the butter and they're having, some kind of veal with mozzarella. It's all delicious. They're down at what's the name of that? Sangiovese festival in Italy. It's all great. One of my favorite moments in my non-religious days. Oh, if I eat with my hand, if I eat there, I still remember the dish. And then he placed it before them. The who omed alehem. He is standing on them, meaning he's waiting on them. I remember this when I was a waiter. I used to think about these verses all the time. Because I remember Rebbe when I was in my early 20s, before I was a waiter, and I was still in yeshiva, and I remember my Rebbe saying these verses, and now he had his father-in-law, with a very thick German accent, would say, like saying that the guest was like, you had to wait on the guest, like he was standing by, looking for them, right, to ask him for something else as they were fed, right, as they were fed. Now, this leads, this beautiful opening, which you would say, like, if you didn't have any recourse to rabbinic literature, right? And you're like, okay, I'm just going to structure a moral character, a model of interpersonal dynamics. Like, you wouldn't need the rabbis to step in here and amplify this story. This is a pretty clear-cut story, right? It's like, whoa, Avram, you go. I like you. You're like really like, look at you. You're hosting and in fact, that value is already simply placed in the book of Kings, in Malachim Bet, right here. If you look at the story, right? This is what is the story? A story of? Does anybody know who? Well, you haven't a chance to read it. Let me read it, and we'll see who the story is about. By Tomer Elayishai. Can you see in source number 2? It's at the top of page 2. Once she said to her husband, there is a holy man of God who comes this way regularly. Does anybody know who that holy man of God is? It's Elisha. This is holy man of God. Let's make a little, let's have a little pied a terre. Let's have a little part of our house that we separate. It's a little part of in the attic or like in the balcony, and kana, let it be small. The nasim lo shamita, let's put a little bed there, a little shulchan, a table, a kisei, menorah, a little lamp, a little chair. Elenu yasur shama, and when he comes to town, when it comes to us, we give him a little privacy. Vahi hayom, and it was the day. Vayavo shama, vayasar el aliyah, vayishkav shama. And on the and sure enough, it happened. He had a little place, a little aliyah, a little, in the inn, and he went there. Like they made a place for this holy man. So this wonderful, like it's recorded in the Bible that this story, like presumably the Bible was not there listening in between the husband and the wife, right? Always these wonderful moments, like how is there a little camera there? Like whoever is constructing this story it's a vital part of us taking it forward in the future, that these people had a conversation and said, there's a holy man that comes. Probably doesn't have to be a holy man, but like for us, like someone comes to town, we're going to give them some privacy, set them up so that they, right? It's really beautiful.
Is vayasar a strange word to use in this context?
You say more. Why is it?
It's just because it's almost like against his will, putting him there.
Oh, against his will.
Yes.
Oh, because like Asur is like to
Bates. No, that's a different word.
Yeah, Asur here means to turn, like, right, Sur Meira, right? Sur Meira Yaseitov, like you turn, or like Asur Nave, when Moses looks to the burning bush, Asur Nave, he says, I'll turn. So here it just means
any enclosed upper chamber with a lampstand.
It's like a little
holy of holies.
it becomes like a theophanous.
So you put up there and you put a little
All right, make sure that doesn't.
Wow.
So it's kind of both of those feeling like something they want him to turn towards them. In other words, they want there to be a place, Yasur Shama, that this will be the place that he, right, Yasur Shama, that he'll turn to that place, and that it will become a place of presumably a place where holy things are done, and that they would merit that. They would be like, oh, like I know this Arthur Kurzweil was the editor of Jason Aronson, like he's like amazing human being, magician, he's such a holy guy, genealogist. So Arthur Kurzweil wrote a book about how he was somehow chosen or he volunteered to be the one who drove Steinsaltz from the airport whenever he came to town.
Right.
And it's like a similar, like again, I don't want to narrow it now to like a holy person or like a special person, because I think it's actually specifically not, it doesn't have to be about any one in particular. In fact, that would be missing the point, I think. It's unfortunate in a way that all these things happen around special, like until these three people become angels, they're just three travelers, right? It's a little bit unfortunate that they become angels, because then it maybe thinks, oh, only angels are ones who deserve to have us take them to and fro and host them. But it's certainly a beautiful text here. I love this small text. Now Rashi, and lest you think like, so I just want to underscore that before we look at Rashi, we don't need the rabbis to amplify the message of Abraham's hospitality. It's kind of very, very clear from the text. But look what the rabbis do. And Rashi will just quote the rabbis who lived before him. And first we'll look at Rashi and then find the sources that preceded Rashi that he draws from to amplify this message as if it needed any raising of the volume. So on the verse Vayomar Adonai, remember we focused on when Avram speaks to the three men, he says Adonai, and the text unfortunately renders it as Adoshem, but it's just in the text, my Lord. Right? Remember I said that Rashi used that invitation to say, oh, he was speaking to the Gadol Shebahem, right? Because it's singular, as you pointed out, right? So here, let's look at Rashi. The Rashi says, Vayomar Lagadol Shebahem Amar, Ukra'am Kulam Adonim, V'Lagadol Amar Al Natavor. Right? So Rashi says that he addressed himself to the chief one, the Gadol, and he called them all Adonim, lords. But why is it in the singular? Because he spoke to that superior, that person who was in the front, and said, listen, please don't pass by. And it's all in the singular because everybody would follow, right, the leader, as it were. So that's kind of how he gets around the singular and calls them Adonai. But then Rashi decides to add this, right? Uvelashon zehu chol. He quotes the Talmud in Shavuot that says, in this interpretation of the word Adonai, I'm seeing the word Adonai as chol, meaning not holy, like Lord, like Adonai, my Lord, my a kind of an honorific to give to the one who is, right. That's Adonai as Lord, meaning person, right? You, my Lord, that kind of thing. But there's another way of reading it where Adonai here refers not to humans but to God. Yeah. Davar acher, Dalet Aleph is Davar acher, another interpretation. Kodeshu, this is a holy, Adonai here is God. Vaya Omer lakadosh baruch hu, and he was saying to the Holy One a blessing, lehamtin lo. When he said, please don't pass me by, he was talking to God, right? Ad sheyarutz ve'achnitz edochim etol, I run and bring in these guests, which is what I referred to last night in my drasha. And in this rendering, as he quotes the Talmud that preceded him in Masechet Shavuot, and you'll see also in Masechet, tractate about Shabbat, essentially this ties the moment of the angels, or these men, I should say, these messengers, it ties it to the Vayera Elav, that Abraham was still in the middle of a revelation from God. And these guests, right, are as it were an interruption of that continuous state. He's in a state of meditative absorption with the divine. He's completely Vayera Elav. Hi, everybody. Wow. Hi. He's in a state of meditative absorption. And that by the way, in the first interpretation, I'm not sure if he's still in a meditative absorption. Like in the first one, It was, maybe he had to have a revelation. Now these three people show up, or whatever it is. In both of them, perhaps it's like they work together in some way, but either way, the Adonai here as God is really radical, because it means that he says to God, hold on while I go take care of these guests. And so it's not just that Abraham was, machnis orech, that he was like, bringing in the guests, and that was a value, but it's a value now that is in relationship to another value, and it has superiority. And so look at what the Talmud says. Just look at this, and then we're going to open it up in a second. The Talmud says, source number 4, Kol Shemot Ha'amurim b'Torah, all the names that are in the Torah, Be'Avraham Kodesh Chutz Mizeh Shuchol. All of the names that are the names of God that are stated in the Torah, vis-a-vis Abraham, are holy, except for one case, which is not sacred, right? Where it says, Vayomar, right? Vayomar Adonai. Now, I don't really understand here, because Adonai here, right? It's really, it doesn't say Yud, it doesn't say Yud Yud. I don't know why it's in there that way. It says Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. There's no text that we know there where it says Yud Yud. Anyway, so Adonai, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. That's according to the Talmud of Shavuot in his first opinion. That's not holy. That we're talking about humans, right? It's not like Kadosh. It's human, as it were. It's called. And then this opinion is brought Hanina ben Achai, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Hamodai Amru. Like, so at least 4 big guns come out, 4 big wigs, and they say, it seems like they need a lot of gravitas here to say this, apparently. I don't know. Av Zeh Kadosh. Even that word, even the time that Abraham used Adonai is referring to God. Kiman, Azla. Whose opinion are they quoting? They're quoting this opinion. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, in the name of Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of the great Rav, the great Amor Rav from the Babylonian period. Gedolach Nasat Orchim, greater is receiving guests, yoter, right? More, mehakbalat pnei shechina, right? Greater is receiving guests than even receiving the face of the Shekhinah, right? This is, right? This is, like you thought that the story was simple and straightforward, and all of a sudden now they have to go and mess it up. And it's in the most amazing way. Greater, they create some tension between the vertical and the horizontal, between the divine human relationship and the divine and the human relationship, or we might say between ethics, right? Between ethics, which is right ethics and meta ethics, or between or between ideas or states of consciousness and human interactions, as it were. There's some kind of tension here that is being explored by the rabbis by this interpretation of Avram's saying to God, please hold on a second, because I have these guests here. And the rabbis are blown away that Avram Avram didn't say it. They said that Avram said it, but then they wind up falling over themselves about the implications of what they just said, right? The implications are exploding. Watch this, look at this. In the Talmud, that is being quoted by Shavuot, so it's a kind of intertextual conversation between one part of the Talmud and the other part of the Talmud, which again precedes Rashi. We're talking about between the 5th and 9th century in Babylonia. The rabbis in Masechet Shabbat 127a say this: Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yidolach Nasat Orchim. They quote what we just saw. This is the source text. Greater is receiving guests than even receiving the face of the divine, as it says, Vayomar, right? As it says, Imna matzati chem beinecha al na tavor me'al avdecha. Adonai, Imna matzati chem beinecha. If I have found favor in your eyes, please do not walk by. Amar Rabbi Eliezer bo ra'eh. Rabbi Elazar said, come and see. Shelo ki midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu midat basar v'dam. That the quality or the measure of God is not like the measure of human beings. Midat basar v'dam, the measure of flesh and blood and flesh, meaning humans. Ein katan yachol lomar lagadol hamtein ad she'avo etzlecha. The one when there's a power differential, the one who is greater in power is not told by the one who has less power, hey, hang out here, wait until I'm going to come to you, but rather, right? The one who has more power usually has the power to say, hey, I'll be there in a minute, right? It's not usual in the hierarchy of in an organization that the lower level employees tell the CEO, I'm in the middle of something, please hang on, right? It's just not.
Yeah.
So he says that's not the way it works. But here God says,
that here, though.
sorry,
We hope to enact that here.
we hope to enact it. It's like from it's like the voice. Where did that come from? I didn't want to look. I was gonna like, hope to enact that here, Tony. So God, but when it comes to God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tiva Yomar, right? So they say no, but God is being told by the one who's less than God, wait for me until I'm finished, right? Amazing. So this is really clearly like they milk it, right? And this becomes, right, if we were speaking earlier about the plain meaning of the text, where God, as it were, where the text is teaching us values and telling us that we are we're to be like Abraham, we are to imagine ourselves running and taking care of the guests and so on. Here the rabbis have literally they've amplified the message. It's not just that being someone who's machnis orech, to bring a guest is a value, but it's even a greater value than receiving God as guest. That when God comes for a visit, God can be told, hold on a second, there are people who really need to be hosted, as it were. And so you have to wait, God, as it were. And God says, oh, sure, yeah, I get it. I'll wait. I'm not insulted in any way, as it were. And then that becomes a value for us. I mean, we can learn it on the vertical about our divine human relation. We can learn it about, my yoga practice versus being, is it more important to do your asana than the person sitting next to you? Like, there are so many levels at which this hierarchy is being amplified, and it's more important to place the ethical above the divine. It leads Daniel Hartman of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Israel to write a book called Putting God Second, right? And how in Hartman's view, this is part of a rabbinic voice that places the ethical and the interpersonal way beyond the human divine relationship. And placing God second means that, jihads and holy wars and all these things are, right, less important, right, that are, than the human who stands before you. There's so much at which this teaching becomes a debate and a conversation. And it also, of course, can be read as putting the human before, let's say, the Akedah, putting the human, right? We know that Abraham is troubled in this way. Abraham is on fire for God, and he has to maybe learn this quite a bit. I'm going to stop here because that it becomes a part of, in the next couple of sources, we're going to see how it gets walked out in Jewish law, and that'll be one piece. And the next piece after that, before we close today, is where the Hasidic masters will have a problem dividing the receiving of the divine face from the receiving of the human face, because that also establishes some, this is all predicated on the notion that there's a difference between receiving God's face and receiving the face of the other. And you'll see how the more Einayim, hopefully we'll see that. We're going to stop for a second. We have a couple of comments in the room and a couple of comments. We'll start with Rabbi Kohler Esses, and then we'll get to those in the Zoom and then back to the room.
So I don't know if this is how the Hasidic masters read the first two verses, but it feels like there's a reading here that's embedded, maybe even in the Peshat, or a possible reading that's even more radical, which is God appears to Abraham in verse 1, or God appears in verse 1, and we'll assume it's Abraham, lifts up his eyes, and what he sees, the appearance is 3 men. Right, so it's not like humans are more important or God is more important, but they're actually somehow equated in these two verses. So that kind of is like amazing to me. And, I don't know a lot about this, but I know these verses are also a source for the Trinity. So 1 equals 3.
Sure.
Right, the divine,
sure.
there's the equivalence right there.
Right, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I just want to say that those who don't know this, but Maimonides, the great Maimonides in the 12th century wrote in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, that from the moment the word Vayirai Lav Adonai appears here, the first three words of chapter 18, that is the opening of a prophetic vision. And everything that then proceeds from there, from including the end of verse 1, all the way through the moment where Abraham is standing, right, and sees the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah at the end of chapter 18, is all in a vision.
But that's so interesting because there's some of the most embodied text of the whole Torah.
Right, and so that,
So
right, so the
visible.
Ramban argued,
Right.
the Ramban argued with that and said, these are some of the most, incarnational or
Right.
embodied texts in the Torah. How can you say that all of that was in it? Like, what's the point of that?
Exactly.
Right, and the
It's
argument
more interesting if it's not all of this.
for 900 years, they've gone back and forth, where one says, almost like Freud says, well, since when do visions have to be less embodied? Visions, we're all been in visions where things seem even more real than they are in life. So there's a lot in here around it, but like the text is inviting what you said, like that there's the text ambiguity. Are these three men, are these three people, are they themselves the embodiment of the divine? It's all really beautiful.
How do we know it's three? How do we know it's three people?
It says,
Second verse.
okay, Rabbi, we're gonna come back into the room. We're gonna go to Amy and Marilyn. Questions and comments, keep them brief if you don't mind. Thank you. Go ahead.
Shabbat shalom. It's implied that Mamre may be a place, not so much a person. It was an area of tree worship, and Rashi said it was possibly where Shechem was, foreshadowing the slaughter by Jacob's children. Josephus says it's a place of burnt sacrifices because the tree was immune from the flames of sacrifice. It was tied to Jewish Christianity, Muslim, and pagan lore, and it was destroyed by Christians as souvenirs by the 7th century. Muslims believe that the chips from this tree have been carried to all the parts of the world, spreading Abe's, just like it talks about Abe's being descendants being spread around the world. And also there was an annual festival there for Jews, Christians, and pagans. Constantine was so upset about this festival that he built a monastery there to counteract the pagan worship.
Wow, it's better than okay, that's great. Mamre, so Mamre clearly is a person also, as I said earlier in the text, it's very clear that Mamre is a person, which lends itself to like the terebinths of Mamre, but it's also clearly a place. And all that other background is really juicy. We're gonna come back to the guest. Thank you so much, Amy. Let's go to Marilyn.
We had a very sweet hurricane this week, so I'm very grateful.
Marilyn.
Shabbat shalom. I love where this is going, but I just wanted to bring in that the midrash of the river of light, that apparently like Abraham's hurrying, and in the middle of his going to get the food for the angels, he has this mystical experience and goes to the river of light, which is at the Kever of Adam. And what I love about that is the two experiences are happening simultaneously. At the same time that he can hurry and prepare the food, because time is different than what we understand, that there's enough time for him to have this totally transformative experience with God at the same time, simultaneously. And I always try to remember that when I get into the state where, I have to hurry, I have to prepare, I have to get ready for my guests or whatever, then there's this expansion that can happen where you can just go to the river of light and time can expand. So I just wanted to share that.
Very beautiful. We're going to hopefully come back to the Moreh Nine to talk about what Moreh Nine, which Nobler Rebbe is also. We'll speak to this kind of dual consciousness that's possible. We're going to move quickly though, because I want to take not more than 4 minutes for the comments from the room. So we'll go around. Thomas. We'll just move around quickly. Yeah.
Very briefly, just doing my etymological duty.
I love it. Etymological responsibility.
It's like for those who don't know, like everything is made out of something that came earlier, right? That cup is made out of clay, which came earlier. So in English, guest and host are made out of older words. And the older word that they're made of sounds like the word ghost, which is not a coincidence, right? Every ghost is a guest. We are the guest of every ghost, right? Willing or unwilling, invited or uninvited. And if you follow that word backwards, in English, you get back to Latin, to a word hospitalem, which means simply a participant in a ritual of hospitality. So you notice that there's no distinction of power or hierarchy between the guest and the host. The guest is the host is the guest. They are one and the same. It is a reciprocal relationship. So the word just speaks to participation, not to any kind of hierarchy of power, which I think is magnificent. Every guest is a host as a host is a guest. And then if you just, because I can't resist, if you go back even further, if you try to get upstream, you go, okay, where did hospitem come from in Latin? You go back to the Indo-European, and you go back to the common roots, to the, through the Aramaic, through the Middle East, to Central
We're all
Asia.
ears, drum roll.
The word you ultimately get to, the earliest, oldest, most pure incarnation of this word is the word that means stranger. It all comes, the oldest version, so. And so, like, it's reminded that we are all strangers to each other, even in the most intimate hospitality. So that seems to matter. And then just as a footnote, in archaic English, there are words that come from hospitem, which also mean attitude, which also mean master. There's hostler, there's hospitalier. There are these kind of weird ancient English words, and you use them when you say my master. Yeah, hospitality. So these are all connected. So that's my etymological definition. I wish I spoke Hebrew, but all I can do is English.
It's so amazing to talk about that. I mean, we're not gonna have time to talk about all these things, but I think it's beautiful. And also, like, one of the things that I love about where Romemu is located is that we're only 1 block north of a youth hostel.
Yeah.
And it's an international, right? So there's a sense of gathering in, all of us being, as it were, refugees in this world, and all of us being hosts and guests to one another. And that it flips so seamlessly is so profoundly uplifting and beautiful and charging. Thank you. Okay, we'll move quickly. Yeah.
I'm Jen from
Jen.
Aspen. Thank you for that. And you're the
Madison, Aspen.
And for me, that was unbelievable, by the way. For me, this text is part of my journey toward acceptance of interfaith marriage. That Avram, at this point, radical hospitality is the tents open on all 4 sides. They're not checking you at the door to see who your mother was. I don't know. I find it very profound, and I know it's a tough topic, but for me, it's an important part of the truth.
So it's hard to get around to everybody. Tony, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to move back. I'm sorry. I said I was before 9:30. We'll come back. There'll be more room, but I wanted to hear, I want to share a couple of texts here with everybody. So the halakha, the way that it works now in Jewish law, how these texts walk out in source number 6, as you look at the Rambam here. This is really amazing because it appears in the laws of Avelut, of mourning. Who needs that profound presence more than someone who's experienced deep loss, and also the reminder of the universality of loss.
Yeah.
That in the laws of mourning, the Rambam codifies. Maimonides, again, if you want to know where we are, we're in the late 12th century in what's called the Mishnah Torah. Rambam, of course, wrote the Guide for the Perplexed, but he was also, more importantly, not only a philosopher, but a halachist, and he tried to codify the Talmud and make it accessible to everyone. And so in his laws of mourning, he writes, the reward one receives for accompanying guests is greater than all of the others. The word is halvaya, levaya. You know what we call now a funeral? Is a levaya. Levaya is when you accompany the hearse, or when you walk behind the coffin. That's called livia, to escort. Like the word Levi, right? When Leah names her 3rd son, she names him, now my husband will escort me, right? Levi. right? Levi jeans. And now my husband will go with me, be a Levi. And so, and the Levites in the temple also escorted, right? They were accompanying the priest. They were there as their wingmen, the wingwoman, the
Now
wing
my
people,
husband will
right?
be hospitable to me.
Now my husband will be hospitable to me. Now I'll be seen.
In
Now,
relationship.
now I'll be in relationship.
Yeah.
So the Rambam says, "V'hu hachok shechakako." This is an amazing phrase. This is the law, the chok, the edict that was established by Abram, our father, the derech hachesed shenagba, that Abram was a chassid. He was a chassid. He did something that was loving. He would feed those who were ovrei drachim, the ones who passed by along the way, mashke otan. He would give them drink, umelaveh otan, and then he would escort them. Ugdolach nasat orchem mihakvalat ben eshchina. Then the Rambam quotes the Talmud. Greater is the receiving of guests and even receiving of the face of the Shekhinah. It's not two, right? There is divine, like guests and hosts, right? It's even greater. And he then quotes the source from our parsha, and he saw, and there were three men. He said, and you know what? It's not just bringing them into your home, but also escorting them out of your home. Right? The rabbi said, basing on the story in the Torah of when there was you did this Egla Arufah, remember the death between the two cities, and the rabbis blamed the host of the city for not taking care that they would be escorted out and safely seen out of their home as well. I had a friend who people know him, Nigel Savage of Chazon, friend of Romemu, was on the board of Romemu, really amazing person. Every time guests came over, he would go from the 17th floor in the elevator down to the lobby and walk them out to the street and then go back upstairs. He never said goodbye at the door. Never. He always walked down. It didn't matter. You've been there for 4 hours. Every guest was probably like thinking they probably want to go take a nap, and he would go down with them. So the Rambam here codifies for all of us, like the extent of, right? And even in the Talmud in number 7, there was another minhag, another custom in Jerusalem, right? That they would, at the start of the meal, they would put a flag outside of their door. As long as the flag was outside the door, the guests could come in. It was like a signal that we're open for business. If you're a guest, you can come in and eat Shabbat meal with us. We should do something like that at Romemu. Right? We should have a flag in the back. Anybody that needs a Shabbat meal, Romemu will sponsor it or something. I don't know. We don't have money, but besides that, I'm sorry, Jeff. Sorry, Jackie. It's really. I tell you something. As I tell you, for years, I would see people gathering to go to a restaurant locally after Shabbat service. I say to myself, "What's the point of having a building if we can't have meals here for people to stay and eat dinner?" It's New York City. It's very challenging, but like. I told you, I read the email from that guy last night that he said, I've been at Romemu now 9 times and nobody's invited me for a meal. I thought to myself, we need a flag, or we need to give people a sticker that says, I'm here for the first time. I would love it if you invited me over, right? I would love to be invited to someone's home, right? Especially now in the aftermath of COVID and, right? Yeah. In fact, there is in Ben Franklin that wrote a parable on Abraham, who sees him actually as a paragon not of this virtue, but of its opposite. If you look at source number 8, this is from Ben Franklin, of all people, who wrote a parable on persecution. And in this parable, he came to pass after these things, Abraham sat in the door of his tent about the going down of the sun, right? Almost exactly like the verses that we read in the Parsha. And behold, a man bowed with age came from the way of the wilderness, leaning on a staff. And Abraham arose and met him and said unto him, turn in, I pray thee, and wash thy feet, and tarry all night, and thou shalt arise early in the morrow and go on thy way. But the man said, nay, for I will abide under this tree. Right, very different, slightly different than our, right? He's like saying, I want to only be under this tree. And Abraham pressed him greatly. So he turned and they went into the tent. And Abraham baked unleavened bread and they did eat. So far, so good, right? Abraham is really doing his, I'm going to host you. And when Abraham saw that the man blessed not God, he said unto him, wherefore dost thou not worship the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth? And the man answered and said, I do not worship the God thou speakest of, neither do I call upon his name, for I have made myself to myself a God, which abideth away in mine own house, provideth me with all things. So he's like, I'm not getting on with your conversion efforts here. Thank you, Chabad. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, whatever it is. Like, I'm good. Thank you for your hospitality. But if it came with strings attached, no, thank you. And Abraham's zeal was kindled against the man. And he rose and fell upon him and drove him forth with blows into the wilderness. Right? That's a little bit intense. He beats him up. And at midnight, God calls to Abraham and says, Abraham, where is the stranger? Where is the stranger? Where is the guest? And Abraham answered and said, Lord, he would not worship you, neither would he call upon thy name. Therefore, I have driven him out from before my face into the wilderness. Right? You think Abraham's going to get, God's going to be like, Yashikoa, way to go. And God says, have I borne with thee 190, I let you live 198 years, right? And nourished him and clothed him, notwithstanding his rebellion against me, couldst not thou art thyself a sinner, bear with him one night. Right? And apparently this person that came was 198, not Abraham. He's saying, but like he's still alive. So it must be that I'm okay with that. And you couldn't handle him for one night. And Abraham says, isn't that amazing? Abraham, let not the anger of God, of the Lord, wax hot against your servant, against his servant. Lo, I have sinned. Lo, I have sinned. Forgive me, I pray thee. So Abraham now is in a moment of contrition and regret, remorse. And Abraham arose and went forth into the wilderness and sought diligently for the man and found him and returned with him to the tent. And when he had entered and treated him kindly, he sent him away on the morrow with gifts. And God spoke again unto Abraham, saying, for this thy sin shall thy seed be afflicted for 400 years of a strange land. In other words, the sin that you created a stranger will now redound karmically to you, that your own children will experience what it is to be strangers. But for thy repentance will I deliver them, and they shall come forth with power and with gladness of heart, and with much substance. This midrash is unbelievable, right? So Abraham, right, in this midrash, Abraham learns the lesson of what the lengths of what it is to be a host, right? Your job, Abraham, right, is to give, to bring monotheism to the world, to tell God about the truth. But that doesn't supersede. This is his own understanding of greater is receiving the gift and receiving the Pnei of Shekhinah. Right, in Ben Franklin's parable here, the rabbis who say it's greater to receive the guest than it is to receive the faith of the divine is understood as I can interrupt my vertical relation with God for the sake of the ethical. But here, Franklin says it's even more. It's like put aside your religious beliefs, right? You're with another human being. It's like you don't have to convince them that your political party is the right party, or that you're, like you're with someone. Your responsibility is to take care of this refugee, right? Now, I know this is so amazing, and we only have like 5 minutes or 10, let's say, if we give ourselves, but
It doesn't come up well here, by the way. 400 years.
no, please, Tony, we're not going here. Sorry, I love you, Tony, but we're not going, it doesn't matter, 420,000, it doesn't matter. God in this story is just the voice of karmic retribution. There are consequences. And he's just aligning himself with the biblical text, which we don't take literally anyway. So it's just a character in a story. And the story says you can't just imagine. I mean, how would you teach this lesson to people that there are consequences for your bad behavior unless you invoke the name of God to say, here's the exile from Egypt?
Rabbi, that may be your business, teaching people the consequences of bad behavior. I, as a shrink, do not have that.
I'm not saying I'm in that business. I'm saying that's the point of the parable.
That business.
Right. In the parable business, you're trying to inculcate the Buddhist parables were also about the natural consequences of actions. You will karmically reincarnate if you
As a
allow
cockroach
anger
for
to fester.
10,000 years because you stepped on an ant.
Right. So I don't take it literally. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't take God literally in this case. If they, oy vavoy, if you don't, there are societal implications and ramifications when one person becomes, 25 million who are acting day in and day out to put God before human, or their version of God before humans, or their version of America's greatness before the naked vulnerability of a child at the border. Or you can play with this in any which way you want, but the God here is my ally, because it's the universal rule that says, oy vavoy, look at the suffering that will be caused, right? And the pain of closed hearts for 200 years, for 400 years, on the backs of slaves, that we will live on the backs of outsourcing of outsourcing, it's not black bodies, in the way it was back in the 18th century, in the 19th century, but it's now, Chinese children, and I mean,
Yeah. well,
it's like it doesn't end, right? Now before we end, because I know that's so rich, and I'm like, whoop, it's too much, but I want to touch on the sense in the tradition that guests also refers to God to God. And the way, in other words, that Abraham is modeling something that God does as well, which is another frame. I know that we could have stayed on that frame in the Franklin parable for a moment. I just want to read to you this source from Rabbi Soloveitchik. And
10.
number 10.
Okay.
The Almighty is the great Machnis Orchin. It's just a great line. The God is the great hospitality, the great Machnis Orchin.
The host with the most.
The host of the most, exactly. The God is the host of the most. Machnis Orchim is in Hebrew. Machnis Orech is to be Lachnis, is to bring in right. His hospitality made it possible for humanity to exist, for the world to come into being. To be means to share in the infinite being of the divine. The divine, like Abraham, invites people to partake of God's boundless existence. Creation is an act of Hachnasat Orchim. Our sages said that Abraham was the first person to invoke God by the name Adonai. This name is of Juridic origin. God owns the world in juridic terms, as it were. We are just strangers whom God has invited into God's tent, as it were, which is the universe. How beautiful is the doctrine of tzimtzum, of contraction. What is Hachnasat Orchin if not the withdrawal by the master from a part of their home so that the stranger can occupy the empty part that we vacate? Right? It's like, it's like the odd bump, like the odd couple. It's like, I'm leaving, like, remember, like the story of Elisha. Are we really using that balcony? Are we using that extra guest house? Right? We own the house, but what we don't, but we want someone else to live in it with us, right? And God, as it were, says, I own this world, as it were, and all of you are my guests, but I'm modeling what it is to say, be my guest. Be my guest, right? Be my guest. Isn't that? It's like, it's like, so who owns anything in this world, right? It doesn't belong to us. The countries and the lines that we divide this world by. God says, I remember seeing a beautiful video at least 12 years ago, more in the beginning of Rome. I remember it was my friend Azriel Cohen, Alav Shalom, brought this beautiful video of these two. A settler and a Palestinian were together on a piece of land, and they were talking to each other, and they both told this parable together. They said, we fight and say it's ours. The other says, I say it's mine, and then they both put their ears to the ground and to the earth, and it said, and she says, it's not yours, and it's not yours, it's mine. And how will you live as guests on my earth, right?
Right.
So it's like this.
Who you're co-hosting with,
From Shoresh, from
that's
Roots.
exactly what happened. Rav Hanan, Orthodox rabbi from Gush
And I'm Schlesinger.
and Ali Abu Awad stood on the land and received that. Exactly. December 13th at the JCC Zoom with David and
Not the 13.
no,
No, that's a different thing.
December
That's
13th.
November, that's the
They
third.
remembered you did.
This makes me.
Actually, I'm not sure.
We'll
I'm
figure
not
it
sure.
out.
Listen to the announcements. I'm not sure.
All right, so I promised the morning 9, but we're not going to get to it. So it's unfortunately, but it's so up our Neo Hasidic alley. And it actually takes Rav Soloveitchik's teaching about Tzimtzum and that God's the owner and all of us are the guests. And it turns on its head, even it goes even further. And I just want, maybe if you don't mind plowing through this with me and then being confused and overwhelmed by all the sources later for yourselves to integrate. I just felt like we need to do it because it's so, I loved it so much that I just wanted to share with you all. So you mind, we'll plow through it, and if anything is like, oh, okay. Oi. All right. B'Shas, it says in the Gemara that we quoted at the beginning of our class an hour ago. Greater is receiving the divine face than receiving the stranger or the guest than receiving the divine face. And he says, and he quotes the entire Talmud. It says, you know, the Talmud phrase that God is not like us, where we can't, in our usual way of thinking, the lesser one doesn't tell the greater one to hold on, but in God's sense, God models that. And he says all kinds of problems. I have so many problems. He says, I want